I was carrying my own birthday cake from the kitchen when I saw them. It was a white cake with pink roses on it, the kind from the bakery on Fifth that cost more than it should, and I was holding it carefully with both hands because the candles were already lit and I didn't want wax dripping on the frosting. The living room was full of people, 32 of them. I had counted the RSVPs, and someone had dimmed the lights so the candles would show up better, and everyone was already starting to turn toward me, ready to sing. And then I looked across the room, and I saw my husband's hand on my best friend's lower back, and the way she leaned into it, just slightly, just enough. The way you lean into something that is familiar. They didn't see me. The candles were still burning. Someone started singing Happy Birthday, and I stood there in the doorway holding a cake with 34 candles on it, and I understood, in one single terrible second, something that I realized I had been not understanding for a very long time. Let me take you back to the beginning because 11 years is a long time to trust someone, and you need to know how that trust was built before you understand what it cost me when it was destroyed. My name is Simone Wallace, and I met Dara Chin on the first day of university orientation, standing in a line for room keys that moved so slowly we had 2 hours to become friends before we reached the front. She was funny in the way that made you feel smarter for laughing, quick, specific, never mean at the expense of someone who didn't deserve it. We were assigned to different dorms but ended up spending so much time in each other's rooms that by the second semester we had applied to live together, and for the next 3 years we shared a space so small that we had no choice but to learn each other completely. I knew how she took her coffee, and which topics made her go quiet, and the exact sound of her crying when she thought no one could hear.
She knew the same about me.
That is the thing about a friendship that starts young and survives the early years. It builds a kind of intimacy that feels irreplaceable because it was formed in the time before you learned to protect yourself, when you were still new enough to love people, without conditions. We graduated and moved to the same city, which was not planned, and felt like the universe confirming something we already believed about the two of us. She got a job in marketing. I went into event planning, which suited me in ways I hadn't anticipated. The logistics, the detail work, the satisfaction of making something complex look effortless. We lived 3 subway stops apart and saw each other at least twice a week and talked on the phone on the evenings we didn't. She was the first person I called when things went well and the first person I called when they didn't. That is not a small thing, to be someone's first call. I understood even then that it was a kind of privilege. I trusted her with it completely. I met my husband, Joel, at an event I was coordinating, a corporate dinner, not the most romantic setting, but he was seated at the table nearest the kitchen entrance, and he made a joke about the timing of the courses that made me laugh in a way I hadn't expected. We dated for 2 years. He was steady in the way I needed someone to be steady, organized, and warm, the kind of person who remembered small things you said in passing and brought them up weeks later in a way that made you feel genuinely seen. I introduced him to Dara on our 5th date because she was that person in my life, the one whose opinion I needed to trust before I trusted my own completely. She liked him. She said he was good for me. I believed her because she was the person I had always believed about everything. We got married 3 years after we met. Dara was my maid of honor. She gave a speech at the reception that made half the room cry, the kind of speech that only works because it's true, the specific details that could only come from someone who had actually paid attention across 11 years of friendship. I remember standing beside Joel during that speech, holding his hand, looking at Dara at the microphone, and feeling a fullness in my chest that I didn't have the right word for, the particular happiness of having, at once, the person you married and the person you had chosen long before love entered the picture. The first 2 years of marriage were good. I want to be accurate about this, because the story of how things ended can make it easy to misremember the years that came before. Joel and I were happy in the ordinary, sustainable way that is less dramatic and more valuable than the early intensity of new love. We disagreed about things and worked them out. We built routines that felt like home. We talked about children with a seriousness that meant we were both ready. We lost a pregnancy in the 2nd year, early, 8 weeks, and it was quiet and devastating in the way that early losses are, when the grief is large but the world doesn't always have space for it. Dara came over the night, I found out. She brought food I didn't eat and sat with me on the couch for 4 hours saying very little, which was exactly right. Joel was there too. The three of us sat together in my living room in the dark, and I thought, in the way you think things at the worst moments that somehow feel most true, I have the people I need. I am going to be okay. I have thought about that night many times since. I have turned it over and tried to find, in retrospect, something I missed, some flicker of something between Joel and Dara that should have told me what I would eventually discover. I haven't found it. Either it wasn't there yet, or I was too deep inside my own grief to notice, or I was simply the kind of person who didn't look for betrayal in the places she felt safest. Perhaps all three. Things started to shift in the third year of my marriage, gradually enough that I filed each small thing separately rather than seeing them as a pattern. Joel started going to the gym more, which I took as a sign he was managing work stress. He was on his phone differently, more alert to it, quicker to turn it face down, which I took as a sign he was under pressure at the office. He was distracted in conversation in a way that felt different from his ordinary distracted, but I told myself I was being sensitive, and I filed that in the drawer of things I chose not to examine too closely. I had been called too sensitive before, and I had learned, in the way that women are often taught to learn this, to doubt my own perceptions before I doubted anyone else's behavior. Dara, during this same period, became more present in our lives rather than less, which I now understand was both a strategy and a compulsion because that is how these things work. She came to dinner more. She texted Joel directly about things that had previously gone through me, small things at first, a restaurant recommendation, a movie we should all see, which I interpreted as the natural expansion of a friendship between two people who both loved me. She was more solicitous of me than usual, calling more often, more attentive when we were together, and I interpreted this also incorrectly, as the behavior of a friend who could sense something was off with me and was being a good friend about it. I was giving both of them the most generous possible reading at every turn. I had been doing this my whole life with the people I loved, and I had never before had reason to regret it. My 34th birthday was in April. I had planned the party myself because that is what I do. I plan events for a living, and I am constitutionally incapable of letting someone else handle the details for something I care about. 32 guests, catered appetizers, a playlist I had curated over 3 evenings, and a white cake with pink roses from the bakery on 5th. Joel had been helpful in the weeks leading up to it in a way that felt slightly off, too eager, too accommodating, and I had filed this also in the drawer. I was no longer looking inside. I was carrying the cake when I saw them. I stood in the doorway for the length of one full chorus of Happy Birthday, holding 34 lit candles, and I watched my husband's hand rest on my best friend's lower back with the ease of a hand that had rested there before. I watched her lean into him. I watched him turn his head slightly toward her, a private turn, the kind you make toward someone you are always aware of. And then someone near the front said, "There she is," and the room turned toward me, and I walked forward and set the cake on the table, and I blew out all 34 candles in one breath, and everyone applauded, and I smiled. I smiled for 2 more hours. I refilled drinks and laughed at jokes and accepted birthday hugs from people who had no idea what I had just seen, and the whole time I felt as if I were watching myself from a slight distance, a calm, terrible remove. Joel stayed on the other side of the room for most of those 2 hours. Dara came to me once, midway through the evening, and hugged me and said, "Happy birthday, Simone, I love you." And I hugged her back and said, "I love you too." And the words were true, and they were also the last true words I would ever say to her, because after that, everything changed. The guests left by midnight. Joel started cleaning up, that particular busyness of someone who needs to do something with their hands. I sat on the couch and watched him move around our living room, gathering glasses, folding napkins, and I waited until he sat down, and then I said, calmly, the way you speak when you are very far past the point where volume matters, "Tell me about you and Dara." The pause that followed told me everything before a single word did. It was about 3 seconds long, and in those 3 seconds I watched his face do the thing faces do when someone is deciding which version of the truth to offer. Then he said, "Simone."
"Don't," I said.
"Just tell me the truth. All of it. Right now. Tonight." He told me. It had been 8 months. It had started at a work event that Dara had attended as my proxy, because I had been double-booked and had asked her to go in my place. That detail landed like something physical. I had sent her there. I had handed her the opportunity and called it a favor, and she had taken it and built something out of it that she then brought into my home. to my dinner table, to my birthday party, with her arms around me saying I love you. I did not cry that night. I sat on the couch in my own living room after the birthday party that I had planned, and I listened to my husband explain 8 months of my best friend, and I did not cry because the feeling was too large for crying, and also because some part of me understood, sitting there, that I was going to need everything I had, and crying would cost me things I couldn't spare. I called Dara the next morning. Not because I wanted to hear her explain, I already understood what had happened and why, as much as that kind of thing can be understood, but because I had spent 11 years being her first call, and I needed to close that before I could close anything else. She answered on the second ring, and I heard in the half-second before she spoke that she already knew Joel had told me. "Simone," she said, and her voice cracked, and I recognized in the crack the sound of genuine distress, and I recognized also that genuine distress is not the same thing as innocence. I said, "I'm not calling to hear you explain. I'm calling to tell you that I know, and that I want you to understand something." I paused. 11 years. You had 11 years of me trusting you with everything I was. And this is what you built with it. She started to say my name again, and I said, "I'm done, Dara. I don't want an apology. I want you to know that I understand exactly what you did, and exactly what it cost you, even if you don't yet." Then I hung up. I filed for divorce 3 weeks later. Joel did not contest it. The process was relatively clean as these things go, which is to say it was still 11 months of paperwork and lawyers and the particular exhaustion of dismantling a shared life piece by piece. I kept the apartment because we had bought it before the marriage and the down payment had come from my savings. He moved out in May, 1 month after my birthday, taking what was his and leaving the rest in a way that made the space feel both emptier and more mine at the same time. My friends, the ones who were mine and not ours, the ones I had maintained carefully across the years of marriage in the way that you have to maintain your own things inside a shared life, showed up in the weeks that followed in ways I could not have predicted. My colleague Amara rearranged her own schedule to cover for me during the 2 weeks I could barely function. My friend Rachel from university, who I had not seen in 2 years, appeared at my apartment on a Saturday morning with groceries and stayed for the whole weekend. The people who came through for me were not always the ones I had expected. That was its own kind of revelation. I did not hear from Dara again for 7 months. Then she sent a letter, handwritten for pages, the kind of letter that takes effort and time and means that someone is genuinely trying to say something real. I read it once carefully and then I put it in a drawer. Not because it meant nothing, but because I wasn't ready to decide what it meant, and I had learned by then that giving yourself time to decide is not the same as weakness. It is one of the only forms of self-protection that actually works. What I want to tell you about the year that followed is not the part about the pain, because you can probably imagine the pain, and I don't want to dwell in it any longer than it deserves. What I want to tell you is what I discovered about myself in the quiet on the other side of it. I had spent 11 years being someone's best friend and 3 years being someone's wife, and I had been good at both of those things, genuinely good, in ways that I had not always credited because I was too busy maintaining both relationships to notice how much I was bringing to them. On the other side of losing them both at once, I started to see myself more clearly than I had in a long time, not as a wife or a best friend, but as a woman who was capable of surviving something large and building something new from what was left. I started my own events company the spring after the divorce was finalized. It was something I had thought about for years and never done because there was always a reason to wait, the timing, the risk, the comfort of a steady salary. The steadiness was gone now and the waiting had run out, and I found, making the decision alone in my own apartment with no one to consult and no one to reassure me, that I had more certainty about it than I had expected. The company did well in the first year, better than I had projected. In the second year, I hired 2 assistants. In the third year, I turned down work for the first time, and it felt like something I had been building toward without knowing it. I think about Dara sometimes, less than I used to, and more than I expected I always would. What I feel when I think about her is not simple, not the clean anger that makes a better story, but something more complicated and more honest. I grieve the friendship more than I grieve the marriage, which surprised me and then didn't. The marriage was 3 years. The friendship was 11, and it was formed in the time before I knew how to protect myself, which means it reached places that the marriage never quite did. The loss of it has a different texture than the loss of Joel, more permanent in some ways because it has no good reason attached to it that I can make peace with. What Joel did I understand, even if I can't excuse it. What Dara did, choosing to do it, choosing to sustain it, choosing to sit across from me at my own birthday party with her arms around me. That is the thing that I have had to work hardest to hold, without letting it calcify into something that hardens me completely. I have not hardened completely. I want to be clear about that because that matters. I have new friends now, built more carefully and more slowly than I built the old ones, with more attention to what I was giving and what I was receiving in return. I have a business I am proud of and an apartment that is mine in all the ways that matter. I have, slowly and imperfectly, learned to trust my own perceptions, not to doubt them first and examine them later, but to take them seriously from the beginning, even when taking them seriously is uncomfortable. My 35th birthday, the one that came after, was small. For people. Takeout from the Thai place I loved. No catered appetizers, no curated playlist, no white cake from the bakery on 5th. I sat on my couch with 4 people who had proved in the past year that they meant what they said when they showed up, and I felt something I had not felt at my birthday party the year before, unhurried, uncalculating, present in the exact way I was sitting. Safe in the oldest and most basic sense of the word. Not because nothing bad could happen, but because everyone in the room had already shown me who they were. She was my best friend for 11 years. She knew every password, every fear, every dream I had ever whispered out loud. She knew how I cried and what I looked like before I was ready to be seen. She took all of that and made a choice with it that I will spend a long time not fully understanding. But what I have come to believe, in the time since, is this. The trust one gave her was not the mistake. The trust itself was not wrong. What I know now that I didn't know then is that trust is not something you give once, and it stays. It is something that has to be renewed by both people, quietly, every day, in the small choices that no one else can see. She stopped renewing it.
I didn't know.
Now I do. And that knowledge, as hard as it cost me to get it, belongs to me in a way that nothing she ever took does. I carry it carefully. I plan to keep it for a very long time.